Coming back to what's coming next, ZenithOptimedia have been one of the leading forecasters of trends and insights in the industry for a very long time, and they've earned that reputation. And we've had the pleasure of working closely with ZenithOptimedia in a number of markets. So please welcome Steve King, who's the Chief Executive Officer of ZenithOptimedia, and he's going to talk about his forecasts, and I know that mobile is going to figure very strongly in them. Please welcome Steve. Thank you.
Good morning, welcome. Thank you very much for giving me this platform. I want to share with you some thoughts of what's coming next. I'd like firstly to thank Michael and Paris for their introduction. As they both commented, we very much are connected to the work of IAA around the world, and we very much support the fantastic commitment and energy they put into driving an improvement in the professionalism of the advertising and media standards around the world. I'm going to try and give you some context for your conference today, and the conference is about what's coming next, and I've been asked to try and explain what we think in terms of the predictions that we're going to make for the next 3 or 4 years. I think, as Michael said in his introduction, Zenith started just over 25 years ago in the UK, and one of the first things we did was lay our stall out to try and be the foremost predicator of what's going to happen in terms of what's coming next. So we're going to look very briefly over the next few minutes about what's happening in terms of globally, regionally, how consumers are spending their time, what's happening to the time that's spent compared to what's happening with the advertising revenues, how they're tracking the consumers. We're then going to look at what's happening in some of the areas of technology, how that's obviously, as we all know, disrupting and creating new opportunities. And then some closing thoughts. However, as a sort of context for what I'm going to say, one of the dangers, of course, is that the market is becoming much more unpredictable. And that was brought home 2 or 3 weeks ago here in the UK, in a slightly different forum, where we had the European elections, sorry, the UK elections, whereas you might have known that everyone was predicting that the UK elections, there would be a hung parliament. You know that all of the forecasters were predicting that the poll between Labour and Conservatives would be equal, 273, and there was a variation maybe of 1 or 2 between the two, and there would be a no overwhelming majority. It just shows you how you have to have a healthy dose of scepticism when you talk to consumers and hear what they're going to say, because as you probably know, what happened in the result was that there was a 50-seat swing from what all of the pollsters had predicted, with the net result that the Conservatives won an overall majority of 331 against a prediction of 271, and by the following day, 3 of the 5 leaders, the leaders of Labour, the leaders of the Liberal Democrats, and the UKIP leaders had all resigned. So I hope our forecasts in comparison are going to be a little bit more accurate than what happened to in the recent election. So, just moving on to our forecast, I think the first thing, and this was a slide that some of you who've seen me speak before will be familiar with, we've gone back really to 1981 when we first looked at our global forecast. All the regions have now returned to economic growth. Obviously, we're looking at the 3 major downturns over the last 20-30 years. We've got the oil crisis, the dot-com crisis, and then most significantly all the financial crisis which started in 2008. I remember at the time, at one of these forums, I remember a lot of leading Nobel winners in economic theory said that when you have a debt-ridden crisis, it will take, previous history would suggest that it could take as much as a decade to flow out of the system. And that seems to be exactly right. I remember thinking 10 years ago, oh my goodness, how on earth are we going to survive a decade? But that very much seems to be the trend. If you think that we are now sort of 2/3 of the way through that decade, but certainly the implications on our business have been far more significant than I think, and structural rather than just cyclical, other than the 2 previous economic downturns. So what we see is that all of the major regions are now going to be predicted to be growing, although the Eurozone obviously maintains its weakness. However, the risks of imminent collapse have largely receded. Historically, against GDP, you can see in orange, we see what's happening to ad spend, and ad spend has historically exaggerated the economic growth. It tracks below GDP at times of downturn and tends to grow faster in terms of recovery. However, you can see at this downturn, you'll see that that lag is a much more marked and much more sluggish. And part of the reason is that what we've seen is that the advertisers reduce appetite for risks, and as they spend more time and energy in terms of managing costs rather than looking at revenue growth. So you'll see that the forecasts that we're looking at are tracking far more sluggishly than the level of recovery that we saw through the two previous downturns. So if we see what's happening to ad spend, we can see that the ad growth of estimate for 2014 comes in at just over 5%, at 5.2. Economic growth is expected to increase in 2015. IMF predicting 3.8 global growth in 2015, up from 3.3 last year. But advertising obviously faces a tough year-on-year comparison after last year benefited from both the Winter Olympics and the World Cup, and of course also additionally the US midterm elections. We forecast ad spend growth at 4.4% in 2015 as a result. Next year is one of those quadrennial years. We have a combination of the Summer Olympics, the US presidential elections, and the UEFA football championships. And we expect these events to propel ad spend to about 5.3% growth before it slips back to 4.8 in 2017. However, one important upbeat note is that the ad spend growth across our period that we're looking at here, which takes us to 2017, is above the 20-year average of 4.2% throughout our forecast period. However, I'm sure for many of us in the business, including me, it feels as though that growth doesn't actually reflect what's actually happening in our business. And one of the reasons for that is most of the growth is coming from internet advertising, about 60% of which is sold directly to advertisers. As you can see here, what we've done is we've broken out and separated out that advertising which is sold directly, generally to small or medium-sized businesses buying on self-serve platforms. Essentially, as you know, all classified advertising is bought directly, as is about 60% of paid search and about 50% of display. So in total, about 60% of all internet advertising is sold direct to advertisers, bypassing agencies. This means that the growth in ad dollars that are available to agencies is substantially lower than the ad market as a whole. And over our forecast period, the average growth rate of ad spend available to agencies is 66%, or 2/3 of the growth of the total market. Interesting for people like me who spend a lot of time negotiating with their parent companies and the level of growth that we're expected to deliver. If we then look at where geographically this growth is coming from, we can see that effectively there's a three-speed race for ad spend growth. And we've divided this up into no growth, steady growth, or strong growth. At the no growth end, the current standout is obviously Eastern Europe and Central Asia, are reflected here in pink, which we forecast to shrink by an average of just under 0.5% a year over our forecast period, the result largely of the conflict in Russia and the Ukraine and the drop in the price of oil. I'll come back to Russia and Ukraine in a second. We then have 5 regions, which is very similar growth rates, which is showing steady growth of growing between 2 and 4% a year. And in ascending order, with the lowest first is Japan, then Western and Central Europe, followed by Middle East and North Africa, what we call Advanced Asia. Advanced Asia is largely Singapore and Australia, and then North America. North America being the strongest of the steady growth markets. In terms of our situation here in Europe, growth in Western Europe is very much bolstered by the UK, and probably we're going to see an accelerated spike post the clarity that was given in the election with a clear majority of the Conservatives 2 weeks ago. We're forecasting to the UK to grow at 8.4% this year. The Eurozone, as you can imagine, lags well behind, but it has at least stopped shrinking. And that's despite the concerns that continue of the new Syriza-led government in Greece, which has obviously raised continuing concerns over Greece's willingness and ability to reform its economy, pay its debt, and even remain in the Eurozone. So after shrinking 5.2% in 2012, and then a further 2.5% in 2013, we actually saw ad spend in the Eurozone grow last year by 1.5%. We then expect from that 1.5% last year, growth to continue to improve, although very gradually, to 1.6% this year, to 1.9% in 2017. And then finally, in green, we've got what we call the fast track regions, and I'm going to come back specifically to the situation in China. But if we look at fast track Asia, which we have incorporated here, the biggest markets in that block are India and China, as well as the whole of Latin America and Brazil, where we expect average growth to be between 9 and 12% over our forecast period. 9% for Asia and 12% for Latin America. I mentioned the situation in Eastern Europe, so we've done some analysis about what we're thinking is happening here, and we've got three separate markets that we've analysed. We've got in pink, we've got Russia, blue is Ukraine, and yellow is its neighbour Belarus. So the conflict in Ukraine has obviously severely disrupted the domestic economy, while Russia has suffered from sanctions imposed by both the US and the EU. These sanctions is imposed have also led to a withdrawal of much international investment. These shocks have been exacerbated by the drop of oil, something we certainly didn't predict, which accounts for 70% of Russia's total exports. And on top of that, led to the devaluation of both the Ukrainian and the ruble currency. These problems have spread to Belarus, who is by far and away the largest trading partner of Russia. As a consequence, many of the international advertisers have responded by reducing their exposure to these markets, while domestic advertisers have been forced to cut their budgets to minimise their losses. So we are forecasting that ad spend in Ukraine will not surprisingly decline by some 62% this year, which was on top of a halving of its ad revenue last year. Russia, which has been a very strong growth engine for the last 10 years, we've seen growth every single one of the years up until last year at double digits. Last year only grew at 4.3%, but we expect the market to shrink by 16.5% this year for Russia. In terms of Belarus, which is obviously the smaller of the three markets, we forecast a 3% decline in ad spend, following a further 7% decline in 2014. Globally, just to give you some context, these three markets account for about 2.5% of global ad spend. So while their sudden decline has slowed the global forecast, it has not derailed the overall global ad spend forecast. I mentioned China, which has been the main drive engine for many of our businesses collectively, and what we see broadly is that the Chinese economy is starting to slow after years of blistering growth. Technology gap with mature markets has narrowed, making productivity growth harder to come by. China's previous debt-fueled growth has left it with a large repayment burden, and the property sector is burdened by a large amount of unsold property. However, it is still growing at rates most countries would regard with envy. GDP grew last year at 7.4, and a very similar figure has been set for 2015. China's ad market is slowing in step with its economy, but it too remains very healthy by international standards. We're now forecasting that Chinese ad spend will grow at 9.1% this year, which is slightly below the 10.5% growth averaged over the last 5 years, but is still more, as you can see, more than twice the rate of the world as a whole. And between 2014 and up until 2017, we are predicting that the Chinese ad market will enjoy an average growth rate of about 8.5% a year. So having a look into what's happened geographically, it's perhaps interesting to go on and see what's happening about media consumption. We've just released a new report called the Global Media Consumption Forecast, and what we've done is talked to all of our 75 markets and collected historic media consumption data and forecasts from all of our local offices, collated the data, and calculated the global average figures. And what we wanted to do is to look at the actual time spent with media. So in 2011, you can see on the top, the average consumer spent about 468 minutes a day, a staggering figure, consuming media. So that is across all media. So it incorporates the time spent reading newspapers, magazines, viewing the internet on any device, watching television, online video, listening to the radio, visiting cinema, viewing outdoor advertising, etc. What has happened is that the spread of the internet has actually expanded the amount of time individuals spend consuming media. So by 2014, by last year, the average consumption time had risen to 485 minutes a day, and we expect it to rise even further to 506 minutes per day by 2017. So I think when people are looking at our industry, it's very much an industry in terms of minutage consumed. Is we predict over the whole of our forecast period that the amount of minutage consumed by individuals is going to continue to grow. What won't surprise you is all of that consumption is coming from digital-led media. All of the growth if we look at is coming through those signals which are received via digital signals. So that is including most TV, cinema, the internet, and most outdoor, since digital displays are driving most of the growth in that industry. So between 2011 and 2017, we expect digital-led media consumption to increase by 16% or 2.5% per year. The analog media includes newspapers, magazines, and radio. It doesn't include consumption of media distributed by publishers and broadcast over the internet, which is included in our digital-led media. So in contrast, between 2011 and 2017, we expect analog media consumption to shrink by 23% or 4.3% per year. We're also working with Global Web Index to produce some more data by both the major markets. And some of you may have seen today, coincidentally, they just released a report over the weekend looking at the global consumption of media. On average, the average individual globally has 5 social media accounts, of which they spend 100 minutes a day, and on average, the average consumer spends 2 hours a day on their mobile devices. So, if we look at how the digital-led media is also responsible for driving ad spend growth, not surprisingly, we can see that advertisers are obviously following the audience. What's important to note is that digital-led ad spend is growing about 2.5 times faster than digital-led consumption, however, because consumers are, of course, much faster to adopt the new technology than advertisers. Many advertisers are, of course, struggling to cope with the transition from desktop to mobile, a transition that customers have made very painlessly some time ago. So between 2011 and 2017, we expect digital-led media consumption to increase by 56% or 7.5% a year, while we expect, in contrast, analog ad spend to shrink by 14% or 2.5% per year. And where that growth is going to be most marked is, of course, in mobile. 62% of total ad spend growth in 2017 is going to come from mobile devices. We forecast mobile advertising will grow at an average of 40% a year over the next 3 years, and it's obviously going to be driven by rapid spread of new devices, innovations in ag technology, and improvements in user experience. We're counting in this all mobile, on all digital ads delivered, whether on any mobile device, be they smartphones, tablets, and in whatever format. Television and desktop digital, the next biggest contributors, accounting for 23% and 18% of new ad dollars respectively. The gains made by outdoor radio and cinema will be cancelled out by, of course, the continuing decline of newspapers and magazines, which we expect to shrink by a combined 9 billion over the forecast period. If we then go on to look at online video, which is the fastest growing advertising category, and that again is due to the explosion of the mobile video consumption and the spread of internet connected devices such as smart TVs and game consoles. Smartphones have now had bigger and better displays, helping drive further the adoption of online video. And of course, we've got the wider adoption of new technologies such as 4D, which are improving people's connectivity and connection speeds. As a consequence, consumers are able to receive high-quality video consistently whenever they choose. Mobile devices now account for 34% of all online video plays, which is up from 17%. So the amount of online video viewed on mobile has doubled in the space of a year. We expect that growth to continue. Several other factors are contributing to online video growth, such as measurement agencies investing in research to track consumers' exposure to video ads across desktop computers, tablets and television screens. Social media, which I'm going to come on to in a second, such as Facebook, developing very dynamic new video products, and more online video being sold by programmatic buying, providing advertisers and us with much more control and better value. As a consequence, we estimate that global online video grew by 34% to about 11 billion last year. We forecast it to grow 30% a year to reach 23 billion in 2017. As a consequence, agencies are swiftly adopting programmatic buying, which allows us to target traditional display ads much more accurately and efficiently. This technology has recently evolved to deliver better premium brand building experiences. If we then move on to the internet advertising, we can see how it's starting to erode the shares of all traditional media. In the last 15 to 20 years, while we've been doing these forecasts, we have seen that television has continued to maintain, or most years grow, its market share. And one thing that we're beginning to see now is, for the first time in our forecast, we're actually beginning to see that television is actually beginning to lose some of its marginally share. We can also see on the right-hand side, given the previous slides, as you would anticipate, we forecast mobile will more than double its share of the global ad market, from 5% to 12% in 2017. However, we expect it to mostly complement desktop digital by expanding the times and place at which people can consume visual media. We forecast the desktop share to have stayed roughly the same at about 18.5%. As previously mentioned, we expect print to continue to lose ground over our forecast period. However, as I mentioned, over the last 10 years, we expect that television, as well as all the other traditional media, will begin to lose some market share. This is partly because mobile is extending the market rapidly by creating new opportunities to reach consumers. So even in expanding medium like television, even though it is going to lose share, it's still going to grow by about 3% between now and 2017. Television will marginally lose market share. We're also seeing that many of our advertisers are beginning to move small budgets from television, as we saw previously, into online video, which we expect to grow from 2% of global ad spend last year to 4% in 2017. As a consequence, the audio-visual share of the market will therefore fall by a marginal 0.3%, from about 41.5% to 41.2% between now and 2017. As a consequence of this, we can see if we move on to look at who the key players are, I'm sure many of you will not be surprised at the dominance that Google has in our unique analysis that we do of the top 30 media owners that we produce every year. Google is now 136% bigger than the second largest media owner, which is Disney, and is up from 115% last year. It's also now bigger than the second and third placed media owners combined. We derive all of the revenue by defining all of the revenue from businesses that support advertising to determine which of the companies are most important to the marketing industry. Google has obviously benefited from the previous mentioned growth of smartphones and tablet, making its central search function available to consumers on the move, especially useful for shoppers looking for price comparison sites, and also allow consumers to view content at times and places most convenient for them. This has created new opportunities for them with display ads, another important component, of course, of Google's business. And if we then look on to see who are the largest growth engines, so we look previously at those media owners by total revenue. This is the fastest growing companies owning the biggest platforms. The biggest beneficiary has not surprisingly been Facebook, which is the fastest growing of our 30 media owners that we analysed. Their media revenues grew by some 63% last year. The reason for that is because they so successfully embraced mobile technology to increase it and encourage its users to visit it more frequently and regularly throughout the day, and while also designing its blend, designing its ad to blend seamlessly into the content feed. This has made its mobile ads more effective than standard mobile display ads, which are much more intrusive, take up much more of the screen, and more likely to annoy consumers than actually engage them. Facebook attracted 27% of all mobile ad spend and is currently the main driver of ad spend growth in 2014. Facebook is the 10th largest media owner in our ranking, obviously rising quickly up the ranks with its current 63% level of growth. The next fastest growth company is Baidu, which, as you all know, is China's local equivalent of Google, which grew by some 43% last year. Baidu's growth, is similarly like Google, has been driven by the rapid deployment of China's ad market, as well as the improvements in search technology, and is now the 14th largest media owner, ahead of digital rivals such as Yahoo and Microsoft. If we then just look finally in terms of the media owners and separate those between the digital-led media and those of analog media owners, you can see that digital-led media, if we separate those out, the digital-led media have driven media owner growth over the last few years. Amongst our top 30 media owners, who are primarily involved in digital-led media, they have increased their revenue by an average of 8 to 9% over the last few years. In contrast, those primarily involved in analog media have actually seen a fluctuation between a 2% growth and, as you can see, last year at a 5% decline. So many of us who've been in this business as long as me will obviously remember the days where we had a monopoly or oligopoly suppliers in individual markets. What we've now had that replaced with, of course, is a very dominant number of platforms dominating the control and supply of the internet ad revenues. So that if we look at the total breakdown of internet revenues, there are 5 purely digital media owners in our top 30 media owners, which are Google, Facebook, Baidu, Yahoo and Microsoft. Between them, they generated some 71 billion in media revenue, which represents 68% of total global digital ad spend, which is up from 67% in our previous report. In the past, we've analysed the discrepancy and the race between content providers and platform owners. Is it better to develop content or to own the pipes? I think from this and the previous charts, it's unquestionably the more profitable and faster growth about owning the domination in the pipes in terms of distribution platforms. What all of this has done, if we see a combination of what's happening to our market, is that data and technology are now central to the arms race between agencies and publishers. The advertising tech market, which lies at the intersection of data and technology, is now more complicated and fragmented than ever before. The market includes dedicated ad tech companies offering a wide range of services, such as using big data to target consumers that are most likely to respond to ads, personalised retargeting, real-time trading and ad serving. In addition, existing digital companies are developing their own tech capabilities to capture more value for themselves, including Google, Yahoo, Facebook, Microsoft, Amazon, and of course AOL, and it's partly because of both their content and their technology capabilities that you saw that Verizon last year issued a bid for AOL of some $4 billion. This integrated ad tech stack, such as those currently on offer from companies such as AOL, Oracle, Adobe, Google and Facebook, is a response to the fragmentation of ad tech. What it allows us to do is to replace the reliance on syndicated data and to track consumers with a consolidated data and then serve consistent ads at relevant times depending upon their previous or current behaviour. habits. So if you think, for example, if you take a luxury goods advertiser, historically we would have advertised on outdoor or TV or a lot in press, and then use syndicated data to evaluate the quality of those buys. What we've now got, if you think about your average consumer, they're perhaps receiving a tweet about a live fashion show. They'll go online, they'll go online and view that on perhaps YouTube, view that online fashion show. They'll then use Google to search where their nearest store is. They'll then go onto a price comparison site. They'll perhaps use Google Maps to see where their site is. They'll use their mobile device to track where the store is. They'll enter the store. They'll perhaps make a purchase. They'll register their data. They'll come out of the store and then they'll perhaps register with Facebook and register being a fan of the particular product they serve. What we've got, of course, now is the ability to consolidate and make consistently that data across all of those disparate customer points with the consumer and track consistent messages depending upon how that consumer has responded to the different messages during their customer journey. A whole way different way of placing media, and of course for the first time being able to place dollars with an exact knowledge of what we're going to get in return for those ad dollars. So a very different type of behaviour than we see from our previous existence. And one of the areas that we see growing on the back of that is the growth of programmatic. This is where we see large-scale automation using real-time systems, which is machine-based transaction combined with algorithms which allow targeting, as I said previously, much more precise and personalised, increasing the ROI that advertisers are getting from their media placement. The benefits are obviously hugely compelling and is rapidly taking over the global marketplace with digital display. Programmatic is expected to account for about 37% of global display trading this year and some 60% by 2017. However, the more significant component is that this programmatic trading is going to spread to all media. And this transition is happening very quickly and it's happening now. In the US, where we've got the upfront marketplace where I was at last week, 10% of the upfront marketplace is now being sectioned off for programmatic. In the UK, here, Channel 4 has just made its inventory available programmatically. Outdoor, as many of you know, is also starting to be traded programmatically. And programmatic is going to transform the way that media is bought and targeted really quickly. And that, combined with the rapid introduction of technology, is causing a fundamental shift in the way agencies and media owners do business. Over time, the business of buying digital media space has become much more digital itself, moving from manual to automated. As you can see on this time scale here, we've gone from manual to automation, from relationship-driven to e-communication. As programmatic spreads to other media, this shift will become universal. You can see over this timeline how we've moved from the original banner ads placed online, and we used to have fax machines in our offices only 10 years ago, which would churn out the orders for banner ads. We then saw a move into site buys based on context. We then moved into paid search, which really started in about 2000, which was the first truly programmatic digital medium, which traded via online interface, where we saw bidding on keywords and optimizing on the fly. So that was really the first example of programmatic. We then saw as sites exploded, we saw the creation of ad networks, which led, of course, to the oversupply of inventories, and then, as a result, ad networks aggregating audiences, but we still had to buy that manually. We then saw towards the right-hand side of the spectrum, programmatic display as we know it, fully arriving, and then finally we now see DSPs, display side platforms, enabling the agencies to buy across sites from a central platform, apply many of the same principles of search buying to display. As a result, we now see the relationship between the media agencies, the clients, and the publishers very much changing. It's now much broader than it would have been until very recently. So instead of being judged purely on our media execution, media agencies such as ours are now being expected to advise on technology, produce creative and owned content, and provide business consultancy. As a consequence, our competitive set is very much changing. We're now competing between, not just amongst media agencies, but also against specialist tech companies, creative and digital agencies, content producers, and management consultants. This more complicated relationship makes transparency all the more vital, so clients know exactly what they're paying for and how it generates a return on their investment. So, summarising what I've tried to say over the last 30 minutes, is we've got a relatively positive economic outlook. As a consequence, we see that the downturn, the very dramatic downturn, just to give you an idea, which probably has taken something like 125 billion out of the ad market that would have been there had we not seen the financial collapse in 2008. The market, the global ad market is gradually recovering, and we now forecast a growth in our forecast in each of the major regions. Digital technology is driving the growth in media consumption and advertising expenditure. All of the growth is coming from digital. The largest and fastest growing media owners are obviously the digital platforms, and we anticipate that concentration of revenues and influence into the hands of those few leading platforms is only going to grow. And we see finally how technology is transforming the relationship between media owners, agencies and clients. I think, as you know, we position ourselves as a media agency. As a final word, I know many of the people in the industry are suggesting that the terminology agencies is one that is anachronistic. I think from our perspective as our agency, I would say that we've never had a more important role to be neutral in terms of how we use the insights that we've got to truly serve the needs of our clients in this very much more complex and dynamic marketplace. Thank you.